Hello, everyone. Welcome to the City of Decatur's Anti-Racism Speaker Series. Dr. Catherine Meeks is the second of four speakers invited to join us in conversation this fall as we work to become an anti-racist city. The series is hosted by the Better Together Advisory Board in partnership with the Decatur City Commission. We want to start by thanking each of the over 280 some odd people who registered to join us today from the various parts of Georgia. We have honored that you have decided to digitally hang out in our little city today. We have a couple of logistical announcements before switching to the heart of the program. One, we are hoping for a robust Q&A session after Dr. Meeks' presentation. Please submit your questions by placing them in the Q&A box found in the panel at the bottom of your screen on your laptop or desktop, or at the top of your screen if you're using a mobile device. Two, we have turned off the features that will allow for us to capture and share your images. You should only see images of me and Dr. Meeks doing this webinar. And third and finally, you will receive a short 2-minute anonymous survey after the program that will inform us how we should move forward and for future events. I am Ed Lee. I serve on the Better Together Advisory Board. The board works to generate awareness of and responses to inequities and injustices in a manner that strives to improve the interactions between community members and city officials while serving as a springboard for policy and programmatic changes. The initial idea for this series was birthed in a desire to respond to our social and political climate at this moment. We desperately needed to create spaces of hope and learning that could plant seeds for communal transformation. This series exists because far too many of our neighbors in Decatur fear that the daily chronicling of racialized violence that seems to be engulfing our cities may constitute a harbinger for their own demise as we exercise our civil and human rights. The roots for this series are really also located in our collective acknowledgement that misunderstanding of and insufficient responses to the various ways racism perverts and undermines community relationships cannot be addressed unless we are in conversation with people who have dedicated their lives to dismantling racism. That is why we are so excited and honored to have Dr. Catherine Meeks join us today. Dr. Meeks is the Executive Director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing. She is the retired Distinguished Professor of Sociocultural Studies at Wesleyan College and the founding Executive Director of the Lane Center for Community Engagement and Service. The center focuses on dismantling racism at both an interpersonal and communal level. They are currently developing and sharing a curriculum that will help us reimagine policing throughout the United States. I'm sure we will talk with her much more about that this evening. It is clear to us that we need the voice and wisdom of Dr. Catherine Meeks now more than ever. Welcome to Decatur, Dr. Meeks. The digital floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It is so wonderful to be with you again. And welcome to all of you who have taken the time to stop and join us for this conversation. So I'm not going to spend time trying to convince you that we have a problem. I want to talk about what I think we can do to work with addressing the problem. If there's anybody who's listening to me that does not believe that their racial unrest and racial injustice and the long history of racism in this country has created a serious problem, then I would invite you to email me and we can talk about that later. But right now, I think that it's really important as we sit, all of us, in our homes, because here we are on these screens instead of being in the room together, facing the pandemic of COVID and then facing the pandemic of racial unrest, which has been around for all these years that this place has been in existence. We find ourselves being given some invitations. And I want to talk some about those invitations and what we might be able to imagine ourselves doing about them. So there is a wonderful word in the South African culture called Umbuntu, and it's probably a word that you know. It's spelled Ubuntu, and it means I am because we are. And it has to do with having a universal notion about the ways in which humanity is connected and shares all bonds of that connecting. One of the biggest problems that we have right now in Decatur, in Atlanta, in Georgia, in the United States, in the world, is that we totally don't believe that we're all connected. We absolutely live our lives as if we think we're all living on little islands all by ourselves. And whatever we do is just fine, as long as somebody on their little island doesn't. We need to be able to think about the possibility of being concerned about one another and connecting to one another in ways that can help to provide for healing. So one of the biggest challenges that I think faces us as a people is the notion of separateness and otherness, and not seeing each other as being connected to one another, not seeing each other as being involved with one another in ways that has to do with the welfare of all of us. And also having many disparate pieces inside of our own selves that we don't address, and then we end up projecting that onto other people instead of really ever dealing with what's going on with us. And so we create this sense of reality out in the world that's based upon a lot of the stuff that's going on inside of us. So I don't know if you happen to be people who look at things in terms of the glass being half full or half empty. I believe that the glass is half full, and the invitation to us is to assert that and to look at the things that we've got that we can be thankful for, that we can affirm, and looking at those things, take courage in believing that we can do the rest of the work that we need to do in order to create a society where we can respect the dignity of all human beings. When I talked to Ed about what this evening should be and how I should characterize it, we talked a lot about wanting to address the collective work of creating spaces where the dignity of every person is being honored. I don't think that the dignity of every person can be honored until people are able to bring that same kind of honoring of the dignity of themselves. A lot of what's happening has to do with the systems of oppression that have been put into place and the ways in which we have acquiesced to those systems. But a lot of it also has to do with the spaces inside of ourselves that we have not confronted and dealt with. So as you listen to me, as you think about this is a lot to be trying to get somebody to understand in a short period of time. But there is the notion that we have inner communities as well as living in a community and being a part of an outer, larger community. And I want to ask you to spend a little bit of time right now thinking about who lives in your inner community. Who is there? What kinds of voices do you catch yourself having to entertain as you go through your work day or play day or rest day or whatever way you're spending a day? Who's there? Who's speaking to you? What do they say? And how do you feel about some of those voices, some of those ways of looking at things? Some of you may be old enough to remember the comedian Flip Wilson, who used to, no matter what thing he was being called into accountability for, he always would make the great assertion, well, the devil made me do it. Well, that's not exactly accurate. It wasn't the devil, but it was those disparate voices inside of him that was figuring out a way to interrupt him and to cause him to have to pay attention to them, causing him to having to own them. And he was in no way ready to do that. So I want you to think for some time now with me about, do you have any such spaces? Do you have, some thoughts that come up, some sides of yourself that you see, and you can hardly allow that to exist? You can hardly allow that particular way of being and thinking to, you don't want it to be a part of yourself, so you just kind of try to smush it away and cover it up, or ignore it, or say, oh shucks, you want to just dismiss it. Well, dismissing it doesn't work, because it's always going to be there. So then if you don't pay attention to these things that belong to you, your way of thinking, what you grew up with, what are your prejudices, how come you've made up your mind about certain things, where did those thoughts come from? These are ways to interrogate yourself and start to understand, who does live here in this person that's me walking around, that's me working, that's me engaging with people. When you ask those questions and pay attention to the answers, and are seriously trying to interrogate yourself so you can get a good answer, a truthful answer. One of the ways you can discover some of this is if you pay attention to the people who keep crossing your path, who get on your nerves. You start finding that some of those people represent some of those inner community members that you've got, that you wish would go somewhere else, and they're not going anywhere, and you keep getting to interact with folks that keep reminding you, the reason why you have so much trouble with that person is because you kind of like them, and you're kind of not trying to know that. So just kind of hold that these are ways in which human beings can learn to know who they really are, and who they if you don't pay attention, if you don't try to learn, if you don't have any desire to become engaged in dialogue and understanding with those inner community members, you end up kind of assigning them to people outside of yourself. So then things that you don't want to fix inside yourself, you just give it to somebody else. You make them responsible, and you don't take responsibility for dealing with your own things. And when you make those projections out onto other people in the world, and then you deal with those people as if those stories you made up in your head and assigned to them is really the truth. It's how we get into prejudice and racism and alienating people, and moving all the way down to being willing and able to practice violence and genocide against people, because we have put all of the things out there that we didn't want to face up to. And we have helped to create this whole system of who's out there that's to blame for everything. Right now, we find ourselves deep into this attitude, this way of thinking. A lot of blaming, a lot of being afraid, a lot of not taking responsibility, of not sitting down and taking account of ourselves and trying to see, what can I do here to shift this gear? As people who are working in the city of Decatur, and with the interest that you've got, or you wouldn't be doing this series, you wouldn't be showing up on Thursday night to sit and listen to somebody talk to you about these kinds of things. Did have some interest in having a workplace that respects the dignity of every human being. I find that to be a commendable thing to be doing and to be addressing, particularly from this kind of platform of bringing people together under the umbrella of city employees. But you won't do anything as a collective community that you're not willing to do personally. There is no way to go out and try to be this person who does not make projections and who respects the dignity in everybody if you're not making friends and building bridges with those parts of yourself. That some parts, we all have some parts of ourselves that we like better than other parts, but we've got to befriend all of those parts and allow them to be viable members of the community. And when we are able to do that, then we're willing to project that out more and let other people be who they were put on the earth to be. There is no hierarchy of value for humanity. You know, all of the folks on the planet have been created in the image of the God of the universe, however you perceive God to be. There is no force that is out here bringing life to people that is bringing life to some folks with one level of value and some folks with another level. There is one entity bringing life to all of us, and every person is beloved by the Creator and is equal in value. That is a profound understanding that shifts everything. I remember driving down the highway way back in the, I guess, the late 60s, early 70s, I guess, during the time that Idi Amin was in reign in Uganda, and just being struck with the understanding that Idi Amin, who was a horrible dictator, had been also created by this creator and was loved, and that my job was not to go around making him into something other than that person. Now, did he need to be stopped? Yes, he did. Was he wrong? Yes, he was. He got off the track, he made bad choices, and he needed to be dealt with accordingly. But it is important, even when folks are not doing what they need to be doing, that you don't lose sight of respecting them, respecting their dignity as a human being. Because if you let yourself fall into the same pattern that they have fallen into, then you become like them, and there is nothing you can do. You become then a part of the energy issue, the negative energy, and you need to realize then that you have allowed yourself to become a part of the problem rather than a part of the solution. So how do you create a workplace where there's this kind of respect? I don't know what all the issues are that you have to deal with in the city. I can imagine what some of them are. But the most important thing, I think, for each person who's listening to me to do is to think about, who do you want to take to work? Whether you're working virtually or going back to be in limited contact with your coworkers, or however that's happening, who do you want to be? This period, this period of pandemics seems to be asking us a few things. And among them is, what kind of people do we want to be when some of this has subsided? Who do we want to be? And in terms of the whole racial issue, I think you have to be willing to ask yourself, what is it that I want to do to help really create a new kind of energy that makes it possible to have beloved community in the workplace? Beloved community is a word that we throw around too much, but I do think that we can think about it here in terms of creating spaces in your workplace where people are being respected and honored as equals and as equal humanity, no matter what their job is, and no matter what their race or their gender preferences and all of that stuff. To see people beyond that, to know that those things are always important. This is not a saying that, you know, the color of my skin or my gender doesn't is included in your understanding who I am, but to know that those are secondary to my humanity, that I am this person, this worthy person with the highest value, the same as you are. I am because we are, the South Africans were smart enough to say. I don't know if you have ever watched a little very wonderful movie called The Beast of the Southern Wild. It was kind of a low budget movie, but it's got a lot of different things. It's a great little piece of art because it's troubling and challenging and makes you aggravated and sad and happy all in the same 2 hours. And so I consider that to be the work of art, to be disturbing and soothing all in the same time. I think the main character is a little girl named Hush Puppy. And if you've seen the movie, you know Hush Puppy, this little tattered child who there's a lot of stuff you could say about her, but we don't have time to get into the movie. The point of this is that, of my telling you this, is that she is always on the search for listening to the heartbeat of everything that she comes across. So the movie opens with her listening to the heartbeat of birds, and then she later is listening to the heartbeat of some other animal, and then later in the movie, they're taken to a facility where there's some folks that are hooked up to life support, and she's in the room listening to heartbeat because she thinks that and says this, everything's heart beats and it beats the same way. And she's looking to keep affirming that as she goes around searching for the heartbeat. So what if we started being more concerned about what is the state of people's hearts? What is the state of my heart, which has to do with in engaging my inner community and working on myself some. What am I taking then out? I'm taking out a person who's more conscious, a person who is more has the capacity to be more authentic, to be more caring, to be more compassionate, to be able to listen, to be able to give other people the benefit of the doubt. That is how you create a community where there's respect of the dignity of every person. That there are people who are in those communities that are able to give other people the benefit of the doubt, because you can give yourself the benefit of the doubt. If you have parts of yourself that you are trying to kill off or cut off or seal off or not acknowledge, and then you go out into the world projecting that onto other people, you're not making much space to really hear other folks. You're not making much space in yourself or in the space between you and the other people to listen. And so, if I don't know what your expectation was for this talk tonight, but as I said in the beginning, I don't think I needed to try to convince anybody that racism is a thing and racism is alive and well. And it has caused us to not be the people we were put on the earth to be. But in order to go down that road to get there, it's not some strange kind of formula that needs to be put out, this sort of magic, and if we just all go do it, we'll wake up and the world will be different. No, it's every one of us, day by day, step by step, looking at ourselves and trying to be the best people we can be, trying to be authentically who we were put on the earth to be, understanding what's going on in this culture. And there are plenty of ways for you to get good information. You visit the Center for Racial Healing. We've got a great website with a lot of resources that you can access to help you if you need more historical material. But it doesn't matter how much more you learn. It doesn't matter how many books you read, how many films you watch, how many conversations you have. When you get right down to the bottom line, you've got to look yourself in the face and decide, what kind of person am I going to be? And how am I going to respect the dignity in everybody who crosses my path? And working with the things inside of us that need to have bridges built from one side to the other. If you've got some parts of yourself that you kind of want to put out of the community, it's an important thing to build some bridges to those parts and bring them back into the community. Because the more that you do that, the more you'll be willing to build bridges to those outside of yourself that you wish to put out of the community. Let's join Hush Puppy in looking for the heartbeat, listening for the heartbeat, listening for how can we connect? How am I connected to you as a person, as a human being, rather than being so preoccupied with how am I different from you? If we just keep on playing around in the arena of how am I different, it allows us to keep separate. It allows us to do the projecting. It also allows us to make up stories that have got nothing to do with who people really are. Projection, I've been throwing this word around since I started talking. And let me just say that is simply making up a story about somebody based upon the stuff that's in your head and heart. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with them. If you're driving down the road and you see somebody driving a particular kind of car, and you decide to make up a story about who they are, how they got the car, where they live, what kind of work must they do. Depending on the car, you might think they might be independently wealthy or whatever. But everything that you're saying is coming out of your own head, coming out of your own imagination and your own capacity to make a story. And it's got nothing to do with that person. And it's important to realize that we as human beings will do projections. We will make up stories, but we have to understand that's what we're doing. And then we have to sit with ourselves and take those projections back to ourselves, especially when we make up projections about stories about people and project it, and then we actually get to meet the people. So if I sit in my house and make up stories in my head about Indigenous people, then when I get to meet some Indigenous people and they don't fit the story, it's important for me to let go of the story. Because if I have met the real people, my job is to listen to them and to see who they are. So much of the problem that we have in terms of race is an inability to let people be the real people that they are. We want them to be somebody else. We want them to fit whatever the narratives are that make us think that we figured it all out. But really the narrative should be that everybody's here and worthy of being here. Everybody deserves to be free. Everybody deserves to have a chance to be the person that they were put on the earth to be. And my work is to make sure that I work to clear my own problems inside of myself so I don't stand in the way of anybody getting access to what they need in order to be who they were put on the earth to be, and that I don't cause myself to miss out on things because I'm unwilling to let go of old ideas. The personal and the collective are connected, and the inner and the outer are connected. People want to sometimes argue that it's a waste of time to pay too much attention with your inner self. You don't want to get to be so self-focused until you can't function. But the person who tries to live their life without paying any attention to who they really are is somebody who is in deep denial and trying to live their life without knowing how much who you really are is going to affect what you really do and who you have any chance of becoming in terms of the larger world. So as you go about your work in Decatur of wanting to have a city that affirms the dignity of every person, regardless of what their job is, of what they do, how much they went to school or didn't go to school or whatever, I think that some of this way of thinking that I'm talking about can really help you with becoming much more liberated and being willing to see liberation be a part of the way we do things. It's funny how much power we have as individuals, even though we think sometimes we have no power. We have so much power that we can use to change the things that are external to us if we would be willing to do the internal work that sets that power free. So I think that I want to stop here in a minute because I want to have lots of time for people to ask questions and to engage you in conversation, because I do believe that if we could approach the work of racial healing from this perspective of looking at it both as inner work and outer work, the personal changes that need to happen and the collective systemic work that needs to happen. We're so quick to go try to change the systems without really trying to make the other changes that need to be made in people. And even when we chisel away a little bit of the oppressive systems, we end up then reenacting them because we didn't get a firm enough foundation carved out by having people become different. People have to be willing to be open to having a society where we do respect people and not having your sense of self tied up with somebody else not being free. If you become liberated yourself, you will not be interested in anybody not being free. If you have a lot of parts of yourself that are being held in prison, you will feel that that imprisoning people is okay, and that liberation is a bother because you do not free yourself. So when you become free, when you become more authentic, you don't have as much to fear. You're able to open yourself up to listen, to let people be who they really are, and to be accepting of who they are, and to know that everything is beating, their heart's beating, and that heartbeat is in concert. That heartbeat is a declaration of our being connected, and the absolute most important invitation that we are being given, I think, in this present moment, is to take another look at how we see one another. Take another look at how we understand our connecting, our connections, our being connected. To take another look at who it is we want to be as human beings. I hope that you will have the courage to be honest in looking yourself in the mirror. It's not a conversation that you've got to have with anybody except yourself, really, unless you choose to take a good look, to pay attention, to ask questions of those voices that come up when, or those ways of thinking, or those snap judgments. When all those things happen, interrogate yourself and pay attention to the answers, and then see how that particular work helps you as you go out into the world, trying to be a person who is open to everybody that you meet, having the space to be who they were put here to be. Brian Stevenson, the wonderful young man who's not so young anymore, but still seems young to me, over in Montgomery, that started the Equal Justice Initiative, has said that no person is a sum of the worst thing they've ever done. And I think it's a good idea to carry that with ourselves. We are better than whatever negatives have happened to us, whatever parts we might be ashamed of. That is not the whole story. And we need to be kind and compassionate and forgiving of those things and those parts, and invite all of those parts to come and be in full community inside of us as we go out into the world, to invite everybody to be in full community with us in the external world. So I think this is a good stopping place, Ed, and we could engage people's questions now, as some of them have maybe put in the question and answer box, or you have some questions, or?
Thank you. There are a lot of probing questions that we have here for you. I would like for us to start with projection, and you talked about projection as making up stories, and I think it would be helpful to contextualize that a little bit. Where did you see projection in the way in which policing in our country is a challenge, both in the way in which communities relate to police relate to communities? How is projection showing up there?
Well, wow, we've got so many negative stories that are part of this scenario. I think that a lot of what we have seen, particularly in these incidents where people have lost their lives, is the projection of enemy, monster, horrible person that I can't deal with except to shoot you, because there are too many instances where people are being shot and then questions are being asked later. So I think that, and that's grounded in systemic racism. I mean, that's where that all comes from. That here we have these police officers, the ones that have done these crimes, which they are crimes. When you shoot a 13-year-old boy playing with a toy gun and then ask questions later, that's a crime. And it's about you projecting him into being somebody that he isn't, because it's a kid, and that's what you saw, somebody that needed to be shot. So that's so extreme. That's the extreme that we, in the ways that we can look at this. But all of us do this every day on a thank God, a scale that doesn't lead to people dying. But we do it all the time. I mean, somebody walks in the room and we have a thought about who that person is, if it's somebody we don't know. And the problem is if you can't let go of it. So yeah, I see you and you look this way and I thought these things, but then I quickly let go of that, because when you open your mouth, we start talking, and then I start getting some information and I can start really seeing who you are rather than who I thought you were. So even if you scared me, now I know I don't need to be scared of you, because, I always had a projection of white guys with gun racks and Coca-Cola cans or beer cans. I would have thought they were drinking beer, but they shouldn't have been if they were driving. Always had, when I moved to the South back to the South from California, always had in my mind that those were people I needed to be deathly afraid of, because here they are with their guns and so, but then I had you get opportunities to open up your head. And I had the good fortune of having a flat tire on a country road. And one of these good old boys that I was scared to death of stopped with his gun rack on the back of his car, his truck, to help me. Was one of the nicest young men that I've ever encountered in my life. So my projection of everybody with a gun on the back of their pickup truck as a person I needed to be afraid of had to be interrogated, because now I've got some evidence that there is at least one of them that's not like the story I've made up for myself. And so now I can either decide, well, maybe I need to take these people one at a time instead of lumping them all into one big category, or I can keep on holding on to, they're all the same. That was just a coincidence, which is what people who are not trying to wake up will do. Well, that was just a coincidence. No, that wasn't. That was an invitation for me to reimagine how I was thinking about these people, to interrogate myself. I think that we have part of reimagining policing for me is about helping to create an atmosphere where a lot of the projection of who Black and brown people are will be changed, and to create new relationships between the communities and the police, so that community people can actually believe that somebody in a uniform, whether you're Black or brown or rich or poor, is about your safety and your well-being, and not there just trying to kill you. Because right now we've got a whole bunch of stories that, and they're not just stories that are made up in thin air. I mean, they're made up on the basis of some pretty good information. But the fact is, it's not all of the information. We need new information. We need to communicate better. There are lots of things we need to do to fix that mess, but that's a good space. And I took much too long trying to answer that question, but.
No, it's great. One of the questions, there are a couple of questions that are dovetailing each other that we have, and it's around your conversation of doing the inner work, and that it's much easier for us to find fault in other people. In some ways, getting to your focus on they have wronged me. This person X, that means all people like them are going to do X to me. Where do we find the courage to be honest with ourselves about some of the roles that we play in creating some of the demons that are showing up in the world?
Well, that's a really important question, and it's one that people don't like to even think about. And if you hadn't asked it, I probably wouldn't have dug into it. But I think that it's critical, because if you have parts of yourself that desperately need to be healed, and you're refusing to deal with it, it's something about the universe will keep sending you opportunities. So you keep getting in these situations where you are being asked to say, why does this keep happening to me? What do I need to learn? Somebody said it's really insane to keep going down the same road and falling into the same hole and never looking down on the ground to see why you keep falling into this hole. Because you can't blame the hole for being there. You can blame yourself for not figuring out how to go around it. So sometimes things that are happening to us keep happening. When the same thing keeps happening over and over, you probably need to start trying to pay attention to, first question, what do I need to learn here? Rather than just blaming the person who's causing you the trouble. Now this is not to say that anybody should let people abuse them or any kind of nonsense like that. I'm just saying that if you keep having a lot of disturbances coming in your life, that you could start asking, what do you need to learn? Because you do need to learn something in order to start avoiding whatever the situation is that keeps bringing that same kind of energy back to yourself. And I do believe that it does take courage, but it takes the courage of deciding that you want to be a peaceful person. I think you have to answer the question for yourself, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be an awake person who knows myself, who is engaging the world from that position of consciousness? Or do I want to be somebody who's hiding out? And people who are hiding out from themselves are pretty dangerous, because they do anything to keep the facade going. And then they can't be honest. You cannot be honest in the external world if you're not honest with yourself. And what we need so desperately is for people to really be honest and stop being afraid and trying to cover up and then being afraid that you're going to be found out. There's a lot of that going on in our whole world today. And it would be helpful to us if we could bring that stuff back to ourselves and own it and not have to live like that.
Dr. Meeks, you spent a significant part of your life working to dismantle racism. And one of the things that showed up when we decided that we wanted that to be the focus of this series, or bringing people in who can help us reframe, rethink the way in which we are responding to racism in our communities, was that some people asked, well, what about these other issues? What about the need for us to address those other issues? How do you deal with that in discussions that you have where people bring in or feel the need to have conversations about, yes, the myriad of other ways that oppression takes place in society, but it does feel as if those are showing up in a way to elide or dismiss the need for us to talk about dismantling racism? What are the ways in which you deal with the tension of understanding that those are important issues, but not wanting them to be used as dismissing the need for us to dismantle racism?
So you mean like classism, ableism, and all of those things, that every time you try to have a conversation on race, somebody is happy to remind you that you need to be doing all of it. And if you're not going to do all of it, I guess you don't need to do any of it. And that's just all an excuse to keep from working on race. And I don't really have a lot of patience with it. I think that all of those things are equally as important. Ableism, classism, all of those, sexism, those are all issues that deserve attention and have to be dealt with. But they do not keep us from dealing with racism, which in some ways, which is the systematic way of oppressing people on the basis of their color, primarily in the United States anyway, Black folks and brown folks primarily. And it keeps giving energy to everything else. So if you are a woman and you're Black or brown, then you've got two layers of oppression to deal with. So you're not going to just get away with talking about sexism and act like racism doesn't exist. If you are a young person who has a disability and you're a young Latina person, then you've got to deal with sexism, racism, and ableism. And so you don't get to pick and choose like that. You know, the ableism is a bigger deal than, or sexism is a worse thing than racism. Anything that's trying to oppress somebody is a bad thing. So we pick something to talk about because we can't talk about all of it at once, first of all, because you can't. I mean, when somebody wants to do racism, sexism, ableism, classism, all in one workshop, it means they don't want to do any of it, because then it gets diffused to the point that at the end of the day, you don't really know what you did. So whenever we're having a conversation about race, it's a conversation about race. And other times there'll be conversations about sexism and classism and perhaps ableism as well. But this conversation is not that. That's the first thing I have to say to that kind of query of, well, what about all those other things? And then you have to say, I have another thing to say about that, that oppression is one energy system. Oppression is a system of energy that denigrates and says that somebody or something is more important than somebody else. And therefore, I can do whatever I want to you. That's the energy of oppression. So whether you're trying to do something to somebody because their skin is Black, or do something to somebody because they're a woman or because of their physical ability, you're still acting as an oppressor. So when we talk about racism, which we have to talk about because it's in so many ways so pervasive across the whole United States. It's more just than the United States, but we'll just talk about the US. When you learn something about that and really deal with that, you can generalize that to a whole bunch of other things, because you start realizing that if you don't denigrate folks because they're female or because of their physical ability or because of the color of their skin or because of their economic status or their education, you can universalize what you learn in the conversations on race. And I have not yet been in a situation where somebody brought up all these other isms that they weren't somehow trying to make all of it level. It's not all level because it gets put out in different kinds of ways. So I don't think there's any justification for using the other isms as kind of a smokescreen to keep from dealing with race. And it just needs to be named that way. And people just need to understand that the conversation on race is gonna be around for a long time yet to come, because we have done so little about really fixing the aftermath of the systems, the slave system and all of the other supremacy, the systems that have come out of our having a culture constructed on white supremacy.
I appreciate your metaphor that you use in talking about the inner community. However, some people would say, well, that focus on the inner community is really just navel gazing. What would you identify it as a way of getting to and addressing some of these oppressive systems and policies that we all know? What's the relationship between the work on the inner community that you identify and addressing oppressive systems and policies?
I think that for one thing, when you go out to try to change something in the outer world, you need to be clear about why you're doing it and who's trying to do it. And you need to be, in order to be authentic about it. So I don't think, I'd much rather deal with authentic people who have been interrogating themselves and exploring who they really are as they come out into the world to be activists. You can use activism as a substitute for really doing your own work. And if you do that, then ultimately there's a fakeness, a phoniness, a lack of authenticity, a lack of sustainability in that work. So I think a lot of our activism has been so ungrounded until the results have been so sad to us. I mean, we see a bunch of people go out and do a bunch of different kinds of stuff. We expect the world to change, and it doesn't. And I think that you have to be really careful about that. I really believe that activism is important, and that we should always be supporting it. But activists need to know why they're out there too. And that was one of the things that young activists said about Dr. Howard Thurman, who's one of my favorite mentors, that Dr. Thurman helped you to understand why you went to protest. See, I want people to know, if you're going to try to destabilize and dismantle oppressive race systems, which we all need to be about doing, but why are you doing it? And what are you after? And who are you taking out there to do that work? Because it's important for you to know the answer to those questions. So, because you're trying to help build a community that's not going to revert back to oppression. Because if you're not clear, if you don't watch it, you will just invent something to replace what was removed. You will create, if people are not liberated internally, you can get rid of current oppressive structures, but if you're enslaved internally, you like slavery better than you do freedom, so you'll find a new slavery. And we have to watch out about that. I mean, for as many years as we've been trying to work to dismantle racism in America, we should be done with it by now. But we're not. We're so far from being done, because so much of the time we go 2 steps up and 8 steps back, because we get, even the movements themselves get all torn apart, because people bring all their shadow stuff into the room that they didn't know about or didn't pay attention to, and it ends up disrupting what they're trying to do in the outer world, because they've got all this other stuff back here that they didn't deal with. So no, I don't buy that it's a waste of time to pay attention to your inner self. What I think is the problem is if that's all you do. If you think that's all you have to do, then you're mistaken, because the more awake you become, the more responsibility you have to be out in the world trying to make the world a better place. So it's, for me, it's a partnership of the inner outer. It's a partnership, and they both strengthen each other. You go out to do work because something in you pushes you, and then doing the work strengthens that something. So it's a kind of a energy swapping that makes you a much better person than if you just try to live out of one side or the other.
It seems that the fear of loss drives us to want to placate the shadow sides of ourselves, that we have a deep concern that we exist in a zero-sum nature of existence, that if someone benefits, it comes at our own expense. And that I think that we see that a lot in the ways in which we're talking about the allocation of resources at the moment, the history of racism in our country. How do you have some ideas, some suggestions of how do we deal with that fear of loss that seems to be motivating too many of us to stand in opposition to liberation and in support of systems of domination?
Well, part of the problem is that we have to let ourselves get past being 2 years old. 2-year-olds see the world as being all about them and nobody else and nothing else, and they want what they want when they want it, and we have to get beyond that. We have to become adults who can engage the world with some understanding of what's enough for us, so that we don't have to be always feeling caught in our worry, our scarcity worries. We have assigned ourselves, I guess it's one of the downsides of capitalism. We have assigned ourselves this insatiableness that can never know when there's enough. So there's always a worry that no matter what I've got, if somebody gets something over here, it diminishes my pile some kind of way. That's just such convoluted thinking, and we need to work on that as a nation, as a people, as individuals. I need to keep interrogating myself about what is enough. When do I get to enough? How much of these things do I want? Because at the core of that worry about scarcity, for a lot of us, particularly those of us that have, a paycheck and a house and are doing okay, I think that if somebody is living with not enough money and somebody is really struggling trying to put food on the table, that their fear and their scarcity is a different issue than folks who basically have those things pretty well taken care of. So when you have enough to be able to acknowledge that it sets you free to not then have to be worried that if somebody else gets enough, it doesn't take away from mine. But just think how childish that thinking is, that if you get to breathe good oxygen, then I'm going to have less. Well, no, the truth is it would be much better for both of us to have a chance to breathe good oxygen, because otherwise you might be dead and it would be hard to have dead people around. We need to come to the point where we realize that if people have what they need, it makes the world a better place rather than it takes away from me. But we have just bought in to a mentality of scarcity that I think we need to be liberated from as a nation in so many ways. And greed then becomes the ruler, even on a small scale. Greed and competition, rather than a sense of generosity and a willingness to believe that life can be abundant.
I'm thinking back to the conversation we had earlier this week where we were talking about policing, and you identified it as one of the more, if not the most important issue that we can work on now. Why the focus on policing at this moment?
Yeah. Well, I believe that policing holds up for us the big mirror about the detriment of systemic racism in a way that it's right in our face. It has brought together these intersections of we had slavery and lynching, and then we went to mass incarceration, and then the death penalty, all of those things, the connection between all of those things, and then 21st century police killings. Just kind of that whole process shows us the pathway that we've been going down in this country, the detrimental pathway that has resulted in so much suffering for Black people in particular, and brown people and indigenous people. So to have this kind of galvanizing moment where all of those intersections, it's almost like they've all just sort of they're standing together and standing up looking at us saying, see, here we are, what are you going to do about this? So I feel like that this issue mirrors all of that in such a profound way, number one. And then number two, that it's what's on everybody's mind more than anything else. And it's the most dangerous thing for Black and brown people right now, to not have, to not switch some gears around policing. I mean, you can lose your life because your taillight is out in this culture right this minute, given what's been going on, as opposed to, yeah, we've got poor housing and poor education and poor health care and poor this and poor that. But those things are not as immediately dangerous to you necessarily as being stopped on the street and end up dead or beaten up, like the gentleman that just got beaten up here in my county, in Clayton County over the weekend, just trying to get an Uber ride from one place to another. You know, he was not threatened by poor education and poor housing and poor economics as much as he was by two police officers deciding to be misbehaving, because that's all you can say. You're a passenger in a car. Nobody needs to see your driver's license if they're stopping the driver for something. So I think that right now, the policing issue maybe presents the greatest threat to the safety and well-being of Black and brown people, no matter, even though all that other stuff is there and has to be addressed. But I you gotta pick something that you can tackle, because you can't do everything at the same time. So we're picking what I think is the most important issue at the moment. And it doesn't mean we don't care about the rest of those things, the education, health, all of that. We do care. The environment, we do care about all of it. But this is the one thing that I think brings the most danger. The environment's right up there with it. I mean, if we don't do something about the environment, policing is going to be irrelevant because we're all going to be trying to breathe because there won't be enough oxygen on the planet. But I do believe this is key.
Based on the questions that we're getting in the Q&A box, people are really attracted to this notion of reimagining policing. What does that process look like?
Well, for me, imagination is one of the greatest gifts that human beings have been given. We've got the capacity to be in any situation, and yet we have the capacity within us to see it in a different way. We can change many things, first of all, by just seeing it differently and not accepting that just because it's this way now, it's got to stay that way. So that's the first piece for me. And also, we hear a lot about defunding the police, and I understand that language quite well. When you're trying to have a revolution, you need to have some language that gets people's attention. So defunding the police is an idea, a set of words that gets people's attention. But then once we've got your attention, what are we going to do? And, we are in the United States of America, and we know for a fact that there's not going to be a dissolution of all police across this whole country. That's not happening, at least not right this minute. So then for me, the next thing is to think about what are the possibilities here? The possibility is that we need to talk about public safety, which includes policing, rather than making policing be all there is when it comes to public safety. So use our imagination to reimagine what this entity that is policing, that's been given sort of the responsibility to keep the public safe, and they're doing not a good job of it. What do we really want? What would public safety look like if we sat down and just start letting ourselves think about how do we want to go forward? The police would be a part of whatever we come up with, more than likely, but there would be so many other things too that contributed to public safety. Well, what does a community look like if it's really safe for everybody in that community? That way back in the days when we were more rural, kids could go out and play in the yard and run around and do all kinds in the street, really, because they were, you didn't have to worry about speeders and all that. Well, those days are not coming back. But can we not have a community where people don't have to get up in the mornings worrying about if they're going to get killed by the end of the day from somebody in the community or from the police? That, for me, is what the reimagination process needs to be. It needs to be leading us to the place where at the end of every day, whether you were to enforce the law or whether you broke the law, you were still alive at the end of the day. That's what I think a publicly safe community is. That before you take out a gun and shoot somebody, you have tried everything on the planet to solve the problem before you do that. And in Japan, my son lived in Japan for a while. The police don't have guns. The 99% of them, he says, you call the police and somebody shows up with a notepad to find out what your problem is. Well, I want to reimagine our public safety in this country. I know it's not going to happen anytime, not next week, but we got to start imagining it and believing in it and working toward creating environments where there's more trust and problems are solved in more than one way. Because right now we seem to be only able to solve problems with a gun. And if people have on guns and get focused on killing all the time, then people are going to get killed. So can we even reimagine a society where, can you who are listening to me reimagine a society where we didn't have any guns? We're so addicted to violence and guns. So let's reimagine living together without thinking that we have to be prepared to kill each other, that there are ways we can solve our problems and that there are ways we can deal with issues that are, not the best. We will figure out ways to do that. But most of our energy will be spent on trying to keep people safe. And I believe that's possible. And I'm willing to keep calling people together, keep trying to organize conversations, I talk to my to people who work with me, to police officers and former police officers, and people don't find this to be a crazy idea. People do believe that we need to be trying to reimagine what we're doing here, and policing and public safety, because right now we're much more focused on policing than we are public safety.
Ibram Kendi, who wrote How to
Mm.
Be an Anti-Racist, he makes the argument that one of our challenges is that we have the cause and effect wrong, that it's systems and policies that are created by vested people who have particular outcomes that they want, and that we create racist ideas in order to justify those particular systems and policies. And I have a question around the way in which we label that got me thinking about that should we place much more of an emphasis on talking about racist systems and racist policies instead of what seems to be a usual trope of identifying people as racist? Is the identification of people as racist just another unhelpful projection that we have and a distraction from talking about policies?
Yeah, actually, it depends on what the racist person, what their capacity is. I mean, if you are the CEO of a corporation, or if you're the bank president or somebody, and you're helping to keep policies in place that denigrate Black and brown people or women or whoever, then focusing on you may not be a bad thing to do. But the bigger issue is systemic. It is now people keep the systems running. So, but it's not helpful to just pick out like the racist person next door to you in the cubicle at the office and spend a whole bunch of energy on them. It's much more important for you to be thinking about what are the systems that denigrate against you if you're a person of color from being who you want to be in the world. So I agree that I don't go around really trying to look for racists in my day-to-day work. I do run across them occasionally, but I don't go around looking for them. I'm far more interested in the systems that have been put in place that then call people in to help maintain those systems. And so when you encounter those folks that are maintaining the system, you got to deal with the individual then. But you don't want to spend too much energy on trying to deal with individuals in a negative way in the first place, because it takes up too much energy. Unless that person is somebody that's like a key to helping you achieve a bigger goal out in the outer world. Because there are folks, people have all kinds of attitudes, and you can be willing to engage people around those attitudes, but you really need to be clear about how much time and energy they're going to take up in your head and your heart.
One of the concluding things that you said to us during your presentation was that meeting people is a solution to dealing with the projections that we have. What are some strategies? Do you have some suggestions for us of how we could break the drive towards ideological and cultural isolation? What are things we could do to meet people who see the world, think about the world in ways that are different from us?
Well, I think that the more you become secure inside yourself, the more willing you are to engage people that don't look like you, don't talk like you. Atlanta is such a marvelous place to engage people that are different. I mean, I used to love to just go to the Whole Foods and sit and watch all the different people that would come in to shop, because I loved being around people that were different. That's part of why I love traveling outside of the US, but you don't have to travel outside of the US to see and be with different people. I think I think you have to turn your intention toward, I'm going to be a citizen in the world, and I want to know whoever I can get to know. And then you have some intention. Like before COVID, I would go to places to eat that were new for me, where, you know, a community of where there's a restaurant that serves food that I hadn't eaten ever before, or go in places where I will see groups of people that are different from me. You have to be willing to put yourself out a little bit and take a few risks in order to do that. You don't have to make yourself crazy about it. You can just have the intention to be open to whoever crosses your path. And when you run across people that are not like you enjoy that encounter, no matter how short or long it happens to be. You simply enjoy it, and rather than having a lot of projections about them, you know, which we can do. I just feel like that so much of what I'm talking about today is about personal power and agency, and that we have the personal power to make decisions, to turn corners that we may not be turning because of stories that our families have taught us, or, you know, we might be practicing being standoffish because of you know, you won't go to this event because you might be the only person there who looks like you. Well, that's a pretty cowardice way to live your life, you know. If you want to go, you go. And if you're the only person there that's brown or black or blue or green, then so what? I mean, really, you wanted to go, and you listened to your heart and you responded to it. So I just think that I'm always going to be talking about how can you be really honest and authentic. You don't need to be running into some other neighborhood just trying to make yourself believe you're somebody you're not. But if you're going because you really have a desire to meet some people who don't just all look like you, and if you have a hard time finding people who don't look like you or think like you, there are lots of books you can read, lots of movies you can watch, lots of music you can listen to really begin to break down some of those barriers inside of us. We're all in this together. We're trying to become more liberated internally, liberated ourselves. And if you think that you're somebody that this doesn't concern, then you're mistaken, because everybody has to deal with being liberated. And how free are you really? And how willing are you really to let whoever is out there be exactly who they are without wanting to change them? And I'm not talking about people that are out there doing bad things. I'm talking about people that just happen to not live the way we do or think the way we think. And there's room for them. There's room for them on the planet. There's room for them on the earth, and there's got to be room for them in my head and heart as well.
I have one final question for you, Dr. Meeks.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of people who have shown up to listen to our conversation, and I'm deeply grateful for them being here and grateful for you sharing your time and your wisdom. And I'm curious that if there was one thing that we could all do when we woke up tomorrow morning in order to move anti-racism just a little bit further along the path that we want it to be, what is that suggestion that you would have for us?
Well, you know, I think that if you're a Black or brown person, you need to make up your mind that you will be very careful about how you take in microaggressions, how you let them go. You don't want to spend every minute of your day focusing on microaggressions, those tiny acts of racially motivated things and behaviors that make up the parts of most days for people of color. You don't want to be so preoccupied with that stuff until you can't live. But you also don't want to let it just go to the point that one day you have this explosion, because even though these tiny things have happened too many times, and one day you have a complete fit when somebody did something that was even tinier, but it was just a collection of all of it, and now you just can't take it anymore. So I think to have a kind of a balanced stance as a person of color, to to have some discernment, what in the day that I let go by, and what in the day do I say something about. And I want to flip that a little and say that we need to be also interrogating ourselves if we're making projections onto other people as well. People of color need to be taking our projections back to ourselves too. Watching out for how you respond to microaggressions, and watching out to how you're thinking about what people, who white people are. White people need to be really clear about whether, a couple of things, whether or not they really believe that everybody on the planet deserves to be equally treated, whether you believe that, you know. And then if you do, then what are you willing to do as a white person to help to destabilize the system of denigration? And so every day you get up and go out into the world, you do your work, you've got to be always living with that question: what of my white privilege am I willing to let go of, if for the sake of liberation for everybody? Now, so what is the one thing that you have done in that case, Ed, is have turned your intention toward everyday interrogation. So if you're in a board meeting and the brown and black people or the women or the whoever have been made invisible, you're the white person who has said, I will give up some of my place in the world, I will give up my power, I will give up my position of being a team player or whatever, to speak up for those who are not here to speak for themselves, or those who are being left out. Then if that's your intention, if that's the way you turn yourself, then you don't let it go past you. Because it's easy to you can decide when and where you want to stand up against oppression. And if you decide to do it today or not to do it, who's to know but you? So the one thing you've got to do is be clear about what you're committed to. And I want to say a couple of other things. I think everybody's either a resistor or being complicit with oppression. You're either resisting it because you understand what it is, and you know that it's not a system that you want to support on the earth. So you resist it. But if you don't resist it, you can't just acquiesce to it, because then you become a supporter of it. So you're either resisting or you're complicit. You're either resisting or you're supporting it. You may not be thinking that you're doing anything except just being progressive and that you can just stand on the sidelines, but that's not true. Because if you don't speak up and speak out, then you're speaking in favor of, silence can very much be perceived as consent. And in this case, and I think you have to watch out for that. So I don't want to lose sight of your question here. The one thing is turning your intention toward being a person that is standing for liberation. And Black and brown people really making the same stance about liberation, but just saying, I won't let microaggressions go without being dealt with. And I will be discerning about it, and I will be very strategic about how I use my energy. So I may not speak about everyone in a day, but I'll speak about the ones that I know I need to speak about. And that means discernment and figuring out yourself how you want to use your energy and not letting other people control you. It's a real dance trying to be a person who really wants to go out into the world as an empowered person and a loving and kind person, and a person that's willing to work to build community, but is also completely, unapologetically standing for liberation and who will not tolerate any kinds of acts of oppression. That's a good dance. It's a really good dance. And I'm just glad to be on the dance floor for that. But I think that's so important. And I don't know how we're doing on time, but I have the last two paragraphs of a poem that I want to read for folks, because I believe a few minutes ago you said something about courage. At the Center for Racial Healing, which I hope you will go look us up, it's centerforracialhealing.org. We say that we are a place where a brave space where the truth can be told. And I believe that telling the truth is the only pathway to liberation. Telling the best truth we can tell. And we don't always know the whole truth, but we know as much of it as we can see at any given time. And if we are faithful in acknowledging that, then we get to see a little more. I believe that too. So we say that we have a brave space. You notice I didn't say safe space. I said brave space. Because when we talk about safe spaces, we want to say everybody's supposed to feel good when they come and leave here. You don't always feel good sometimes when you hear the truth. Sometimes it's unsettling, it's disturbing. But hopefully in our space, you will know that you are loved and respected and that your dignity is held intact, no matter what kind of truth we have had to tell. So we want to create that kind of space where people can hear the truth and leave feeling like they're still a worthy human being because they're not being judged and told that they're bad people. We're just talking about some stuff that needs to be brought to the surface. So creating a brave space where the truth can be told. And then my friend David White, who's a poet that I will send a flyer to you, Ed, to send out to everybody who has participated tonight, because I think people would benefit greatly from knowing David White. David White is a poet who uses poetry to get at a lot of these issues that we're talking about. He's an Irish Englishman who has done some amazing work on himself and comes to write and talk about poetry in ways that I find to be incredibly enlivening. He says poetry is a language against which there is no defense. And I love that idea because we are so quick to defend ourselves against the stuff that we don't want to pay attention to. And he talks about his lecture that he's going to do with us in October is part of the title is A Half a Shade Braver. So I think that every day, we can all be committed to just trying to be a half a shade braver than we were yesterday or last week or whenever. And just think about what would happen. Just think about what would happen in the city of Decatur if everybody, all of the folks that were on this call or that registered or that listened to the recording decided to just be a half a shade braver. And whatever it is you're doing, you just step it up a bit. And however you're trying to create community and create a community where everybody's dignity is being respected. So I want to read these two stanzas of a poem from John O'Donohue, who I think I have some Irish blood because I love Celtic stuff so much. And I love these two Irish poets, Donald O'Donohue and White, both of whom, by the way, were good friends with each other. And this actually comes from a little poem called The Morning Offering, which is, you're supposed to read it in the morning. So I'm not going to read the part about the morning. I'm just going to read you these last two paragraphs because I think they speak so much to what we've been talking about today. May my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers, to break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more. I absolutely love those words. And I do believe that the truth will disturb us, but it will also set us free. And I do believe that we have to be always turning our heads in that direction in order to be the people, to become the people we were put on the earth to be. And as we work to do that, then our cities will be better, our workplaces, our schools, our hospitals, everywhere. And we will become people who do not tolerate oppression. That's the point. When you get to the point that you won't tolerate oppression, then you stand up against oppressive systems. And until then, you acquiesce to them. And so it's, it's complicated and complex. It's also simple. And I wish you all to be a half a shade braver and to build, continue to build. I love Decatur. I hang out there as much as I can. And I hope you continue to make that city a city that glows because you are people who really are trying to be authentic and who really respect the dignity in yourself and everybody who crosses your path.
Dr. Meeks, thank you for such a lovely and amazing dance.
Yeah.
I am deeply honored and appreciative that you have shared this conversation with me and with others. And on behalf of the City of Decatur and on behalf of the Better Together Advisory Board, thank you, thank you, thank you. And to all of those who are with us and sharing this time that we had together, please go to the Center for Racial Healing to find out much more about the amazing work that they're doing and to find out about the efforts that they are putting in to reimagine policing. And I look forward to our next conversation together.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. This has been a wonderful time for me. I love having these conversations, and I really hope that it inspires people and encourages us all to be as a half a shade braver. So
Good
good
evening.
night. Good night.
Conversation. Good night.